Greetings to my dear guests on this video. I wish you a pleasant viewing and look forward to your feedback in the comments. Grayson Manufacturing wasn't just another company, it was a pillar. For over 5 decades, its name had stood for stability, contracts worth millions, and long-term international partnerships. Its headquarters stretched across 3 buildings in the heart of the city, with over 600 employees working behind glass panels and polished wood. I, Mary Cooper, had a modest desk tucked between the finance floor and executive meeting rooms. Nothing impressive. No corner office. No high-rise view. And yet, there was one thing that made me irreplaceable. I knew sign language. Not just enough to spell my name or say hello. I had trained for years, taken night courses, practiced in silence with my own reflection, all for one purpose, to communicate with Thomas Delacroix. Thomas was the CEO of the Trident Group, a globally influential conglomerate based in Montreal. He was born deaf and mute, but that never limited him. He was a shrewd businessman, sharper than most, and he trusted few people. Grayson's first meeting with Trident had nearly fallen apart because no one on our side could properly communicate. The interpreters made him uncomfortable, too stiff, too rehearsed. It was only when I stepped in, hands moving naturally, eye contact steady and respectful, that he paused and finally responded. Since then, I'd been present at every negotiation, every quarterly review, every closed-door meeting with Delacroix. He wouldn't sign a contract without seeing me in the room. My voice may not have carried weight in the company hierarchy, but my hands spoke for the firm's survival. People at the office sometimes forgot how important that was. I didn't have a degree from an Ivy League school. I didn't use big words or flaunt expensive handbags. But Thomas Delacroix once told me, in his quiet language, that I was the only person he ever felt truly understood him. That meant more to me than any title ever could. Of course, in a company that large, people come and go. Executives change. Strategies shift. But some things, like trust, are harder to replace. And while I kept showing up on time, doing my job, bridging 2 worlds with my hands, I never once imagined how quickly everything could start to change. There was a chill in the office air that week, not from the vents, but from the silence that follows change. On Monday morning, the announcement came. Grayson Manufacturing had a new CEO. His name was Marcus Bell, and his credentials read like a resume designed to impress investors rather than colleagues. Harvard graduate, ex-McKinsey strategist, youngest regional director at a private equity firm. The kind of man who calculated before he listened. The company was buzzing. People whispered by the elevators and traded theories near the printer. The executive floor was suddenly closed off for realignment meetings. One director joked that the new guy had already replaced half the boardroom chairs, and maybe a few board members too. I watched it all quietly. That was always my way. I kept my focus on preparing for Trident's upcoming quarterly visit. Mr. Delacroix, the CEO of Trident, would arrive next Wednesday. That gave me just over a week to finalize the visual aids, ensure the contracts were clean, and rehearse some of the more complex sign phrasing, especially around pricing tiers and intellectual property clauses. He appreciated clarity, precision, trust. He always said I was the only one who didn't make him feel like a business inconvenience. On Thursday afternoon, my inbox pinged. Subject, Meeting Request, Conference Room C. From Executive Assistant to Mr. Bell. I blinked at the screen. No context, no topic. Just a 2 p.m. slot with the new boss himself. I arrived on time. He was already seated, looking over a file that I quickly realized was my personnel record. He didn't look up at first, just tapped a pen against the folder and muttered, "Mary Cooper." "Yes," I answered. He flipped a page and narrowed his eyes. "You've been here 18 years?" 19 in December. He nodded, distracted. No post-secondary education, no current management title, no professional certifications. I said nothing. I'd learned early in life that silence often speaks louder than defense. Marcus leaned back in his chair, considering me like a puzzle with too few pieces. I've been brought in to restructure Grayson for long-term growth. That means standardizing roles, measuring output, and ensuring every team has leadership and credentials to match their function. Still, I didn't speak. I'm trying to understand where you fit into this framework, he continued. You're assigned to special accounts, but I don't see any official projects under your name. No certifications in legal compliance, HR, or communications, not even clerical supervision. That's correct, I replied carefully. He folded his hands together. Do you have any interest in being reassigned? We may have space in administrative services. I stared at him, briefly stunned. He thought I was idle, redundant. I work with Trident Group, I said calmly. I've been their point of contact for many years. He didn't blink. I'll take a look at the contract. If they're still active, we'll evaluate how to structure the relationship more formally, perhaps loop in someone from procurement or legal. I felt my stomach twist. This man, this polished stranger with a sharp suit and a strategic mind, had no idea what that relationship actually looked like. He saw line items, not people. And he hadn't yet asked why Delacroix's account ran so smoothly year after year. I left the meeting without protest, but my mind raced. He didn't know. He had no idea I was the only one in the entire company who could speak to Thomas Delacroix in his own language. And he had no idea what would happen if I suddenly wasn't there when Thomas walked through those glass doors next Wednesday. The air in the office was heavier the following Monday. It wasn't the weather or a broken thermostat. It was the quiet panic that always followed when people started getting called upstairs. Folders vanished from desks. Email accounts stopped responding. One morning, someone was drinking coffee in the break room, and the next, their nameplate was gone. I kept to my usual schedule, arriving early and spending time reviewing Delacroix's last feedback on our partnership report. I still had 3 days to finalize the visual language and confirm the hospitality arrangements for his visit. No one else was talking about it. They never did. His visits were treated like any other client drop-in. But I knew the truth. Thomas Delacroix came to inspect trust, to feel the rhythm of the relationship, and if that rhythm ever broke, so would the deal. That afternoon, I received another meeting request. This time, the subject line was blank. Marcus Bell was alone again, this time sitting at the head of a long, empty conference table. He didn't offer me a seat. I took one anyway. Mary, he said, I've reviewed your internal profile further. I nodded, waiting. He tapped his fingers together. I've had several conversations with our HR and strategy teams, and I'll be honest with you, we're heading in a direction that requires a more professional workforce. I said nothing. He continued. Credentialed, certified, competitive. He said the words like a mantra. Finally, his gaze settled on me. You've been with the company for 19 years, but you only completed elementary school. You hold no college degree, no formal certifications, and you're not currently managing a team. There's no upward trajectory. My throat tightened, but I stayed composed. Our company only wants qualified employees, Mary, he said, voice flat. And you're not qualified by any modern business standard. There it was, simple, cruel in its simplicity. I'm afraid we're going to have to let you go. Your position will be terminated, effective immediately. You'll receive 3 months severance, and HR will coordinate your exit interview. It took a moment for me to breathe. He still didn't know, still hadn't asked, still didn't realize what I really did here. I stood up, straightened my jacket, and said the only thing I could. I wish you luck with your next negotiations. He gave me a puzzled look, a flicker of confusion in his otherwise unreadable expression. He wouldn't understand until Wednesday. Until Thomas walked in. Until it became clear that no one else in the building could understand a single word he signed. I walked out without tears. I wouldn't give Marcus Bell the satisfaction. He saw numbers and degrees. I lived through silence, through nuance, through the flick of a finger and the pause between breaths. I went to my desk, quietly packed the few things that mattered. A framed photo of my mother. A small ceramic cup Thomas once gave me. Hand-painted, no words, just a symbol of gratitude. A soft thank you from a man whose world few had ever tried to enter. By the time I reached the lobby, no one had noticed I was gone. Not yet. But they would. They would notice very soon. The world outside the building looked the same, but everything felt different. I stepped out of Grayson's revolving glass doors for what should have been the last time, my bag light, but my heart heavier than I expected. Not because I had lost my job. I'd been poor before, started from less than nothing. No, it was the way it ended. The way a man who didn't know me, didn't ask, and didn't care, could cut away nearly 2 decades of work with a sentence. But I wasn't going to beg. I didn't tell anyone I'd been fired. Not my colleagues, not the security guard who always smiled when I arrived early, not the receptionist who sometimes brought me coffee on cold mornings. Let Marcus announce it if he dared. Let the realization crawl in slowly, like a leak no one notices until the floor is soaked. I knew the meeting with Trident was scheduled for Wednesday, 3 days away. Marcus and his fresh-faced executives were probably patting themselves on the back for cleaning house, blind to what they'd just thrown out. So I went home. But I didn't sit still. That evening, I made 3 phone calls. The first was to my old instructor, Carl Hartman, one of the most respected American Sign Language specialists on the East Coast. He'd done freelance interpretation for CEOs, senators, even medical institutions. He'd once called me the only interpreter who listens with her heart first. I explained carefully what had happened. His voice lowered. Let me guess. They'll be calling me soon. They might, I said. I just wanted you to know that I'm no longer associated with Grayson, and that their new leadership sees no value in people like us. Carl paused. Message received. The second call was to Melinda Rhodes, a former classmate from an advanced interpreter workshop I'd taken years ago. She'd gone on to work with legal teams in multilingual courts, known for her loyalty and discretion. Same message. The third call was to Alice Freeman, Thomas Delacroix's personal liaison at Trident. She and I had developed an understanding over the years. We didn't speak often, but when we did, it was always honest. I won't be at the meeting Wednesday, I told her. Silence. You're not sick, she said softly. Are you? No, I was let go. Alice didn't ask why. She understood more from silence than most people did from shouting. Thank you for telling me, she said. And then she hung up. I knew Alice would tell Thomas, not directly, not in so many words, but in a look, in a gesture, in a shift of tone. Grayson had no idea how relationships worked in silence. No idea that trust isn't spoken. It's earned with presence, with consistency. Thomas had never signed a deal without me at the table, and they'd expect him to do just that, with a stranger in 3 days. Let them. Let Marcus Bell scramble for a certified interpreter with no emotional intelligence, no connection, no ability to read between the gestures. Let him explain to Trident why the one face they trusted was gone. Let him navigate a deaf business titan with no map, no compass, and no translator who could speak the language of nuance. For once, I didn't feel small. I felt like the stone in their shoe, invisible but impossible to ignore. I didn't seek revenge. I simply chose silence. Their silence. And when Wednesday came, I knew it wouldn't go quietly. Wednesday morning arrived without fanfare. No one in the building seemed nervous, at least not yet. In fact, the mood in the executive wing was surprisingly upbeat. Catering had arrived early. The conference table had been polished to a shine. A chilled pitcher of lemon water sat flanked by 2 sleek glasses, waiting for guests who had already traveled halfway across the continent. At precisely 9:02 a.m., the elevator opened, and Thomas Delacroix stepped into the Grayson lobby. Tall, composed, and sharply dressed in his usual charcoal suit, he was accompanied only by Alice Freeman, his executive liaison. As always, Thomas moved with quiet command, not needing to speak to be heard. Those who worked with him before instinctively stepped out of his way. The front desk buzzed Marcus Bell's assistant. 5 minutes later, Marcus, immaculate in his tailored blazer and smug confidence, arrived to greet him. Mr. Delacroix, he said with a tight corporate smile. Welcome back to Grayson. I hope your flight was smooth. Thomas looked to Alice, who translated the welcome and sign. He gave a polite nod. Marcus turned to lead them toward the conference room. We've prepared everything. The contract adjustments should be ready for review, and our interpreter will be joining us shortly. Alice paused. Interpreter? She asked. Yes, Marcus said. already moving forward. Mary, He stopped mid-sentence, his brow furrowed. He turned to his assistant, who stood just outside the door. Get Mary Cooper in here. The assistant shifted uncomfortably. Mr. Bell, Mary Cooper was let go, last week. Marcus blinked. Excuse me? You signed off on it, sir. The silence in the hallway was sudden and jarring. I thought she was an administrative assistant, he muttered, eyes narrowing. Why the hell didn't anyone tell me she was an interpreter? She didn't have that listed in her HR profile, his assistant offered weakly, and you said— I said find someone with credentials, Marcus snapped. I didn't say fire the person who handles our largest international account. Alice turned and locked eyes with Thomas. She signed quickly. His expression didn't change, not visibly, but his stance stiffened. He looked directly at Marcus, waiting. Marcus's voice lowered. Can we get another interpreter here? Someone good. The assistant hesitated. We've called 3 agencies already. No one's available on short notice. Call more. Call Carl Hartman. We tried, she said. He declined. What do you mean declined? He said he wasn't comfortable working with a company that didn't value its internal interpreters. Marcus paled. Then try Rhodes. Try Freeman. Anyone? Sir, she interrupted gently. Freeman is Thomas's liaison. She's already here. Marcus ran a hand over his face. Anyone else? Now. Inside the glass-walled conference room, Thomas Delacroix had taken a seat. His hands were folded neatly in front of him. Alice stood beside him, silent, refusing to speak for the company. That was never her role. She would interpret, but she wouldn't negotiate. Marcus stepped into the room with a forced smile. We're just waiting for one more person. Thomas made a single motion. Alice translated. We'll wait, but we will not stay long. Panic bloomed behind Marcus's eyes. He stepped out of the room and turned to his assistant again. Do not let this fall apart. You find me someone. I don't care how much it costs. But it was already too late. In the silent language they had ignored, insulted, and cut away, the damage had already been done. The boardroom had never been so quiet. Thomas Delacroix sat motionless, expression unreadable. Alice Freeman, his trusted liaison, stood beside him like stone. She had signed the last of his messages without looking at Marcus. The room's energy was collapsing, not dramatically, but steadily, like oxygen being siphoned away. Marcus Bell had tried everything. Excuses, gifts, last-minute offers, shallow apologies. Nothing worked. Just as Thomas rose from his chair, signaling the end of the meeting, the door creaked open. Heads turned. A pause swept over the room like a ripple. Mary Cooper stood in the doorway. No badge, no official authority, just calm, steady presence. Her eyes met Alice's, then Thomas's. And then, without asking permission or waiting for instruction, she stepped inside and gently closed the door behind her. Marcus's face was a mix of confusion and fury. What is she doing here? He hissed toward his assistant. But Mary didn't acknowledge him. She walked directly to the head of the table, faced Thomas, and began to sign. Fluid, elegant, deliberate. Not just translating, but speaking, explaining. Thomas tilted his head slightly, watching her hands with sharp attention. Mary's tone never rose. Her hands moved gracefully, weaving a story that only 3 people in the room understood. After a minute, Thomas responded. Mary nodded, responded in kind. There was a rhythm, a calm, a peace in their exchange that hadn't been in the room all morning. After several minutes, Thomas's body relaxed slightly. His expression softened. He looked toward Marcus and gave a small, formal nod. Alice signed the words aloud. We will proceed with signing, but this will be the last visit under current leadership. Marcus blinked, then smiled. A corporate slick grin. Of course, we understand. We're grateful. Papers were signed. Hands were shaken. Awkwardly. The tension lifted, if only a little. Mary stepped back without a word and slipped out of the room before anyone had a chance to stop her. Marcus didn't even thank her. He just exhaled, wiped his forehead, and muttered, "Crisis averted." Later that afternoon, champagne corks popped in the executive lounge. Marcus delivered a self-congratulatory speech about overcoming obstacles and collaborative success. His assistant sent out a company-wide email praising the leadership team for saving the Trident partnership. But just before the day ended, a message arrived in the legal department's inbox. Subject: Withdrawal of future engagement. From Trident Group Legal Affairs. The letter was brief, polite, lethal. Effective immediately, Trident Group would be suspending all future projects, deliveries, and planned expansions with Grayson Manufacturing. Contracts would be honored to their legal minimum, but no new discussions would take place. No press releases, no follow-up meetings, no further communication. Attached was a video file. Internal use only. It was footage from the security camera in the boardroom. No sound, only video. Mary Cooper, standing at the head of the table, signing slowly and clearly to Thomas Delacroix. And while no one outside the three of them could understand the gestures, the report from Alice clarified it later. Mary had told Thomas, clearly, carefully, "They fired me for not having a degree. They didn't even ask who I was. If they treat people like this inside their walls, imagine how they'll treat you once the ink is dry. Walk away. They don't deserve your trust." And he had listened, smiled, and nodded. He had signed the papers only to protect his company's current obligations, but the partnership was dead. Marcus stood frozen, pale, staring at the screen. He didn't speak. Couldn't. The silence that followed was not just awkward. It was prophetic. The moment Marcus watched the footage, something inside him snapped. The video looped again and again in his mind. Mary's composed face, her measured movements, the way she looked directly at Thomas while the entire leadership team sat clueless just a few feet away. He'd been played, not loudly or publicly, but with a precision he hadn't expected from someone he'd dismissed as unqualified. "This was sabotage," he hissed to no one in particular. The boardroom was empty now, save for his assistant and the director of strategy, who both stood frozen near the back wall, unsure whether to speak. "Find her," Marcus said sharply. "I want to know where she works, who she's talking to, what she's doing." "But, sir," the assistant hesitated. "She didn't technically breach any contract. She wasn't an employee anymore." "I don't care about the contract," Marcus spat. "She humiliated this company. She humiliated me, and she cost us our biggest partner." He slammed his palm against the desk. "You don't just walk in here, play the savior, and then gut us from the inside." The irony, of course, was that he had never asked what Mary really did in the first place. Meanwhile, across the city, Mary sat in a small cafe, sipping tea near the window as rain tapped gently against the glass. The noise was soft, steady, comforting. She wasn't hiding. She hadn't gone off the grid, but she also hadn't turned her phone on since the meeting. She didn't need to. By mid-afternoon, a courier arrived with a sleek envelope, hand-delivered to the cafe hostess. "Are you Mary Cooper?" the young woman asked. Mary nodded. She opened the envelope calmly. Inside was a letter, handwritten on thick ivory paper. "Miss Cooper, we'd like to formally offer you a position within the Trident Group. Your loyalty, discretion, and clarity of purpose have always defined our trust in you. We believe your values reflect our own. The role is yours, if you choose it. Respectfully, T. Delacroix." There was no salary listed, no HR jargon, just the kind of message only Thomas Delacroix would send, stripped of fluff, rooted in respect. Mary folded the letter gently and smiled. Back at Grayson, the mood was deteriorating by the hour. Shareholders were calling nonstop. Legal teams were panicking about potential ripple effects. Rumors had already begun circulating internally, not just about Trident, but about how many other clients might be watching. And then, worse news. Another client, a mid-sized European tech supplier, reached out to delay their next quarterly planning session. No official explanation, just a quiet, careful distance. Marcus paced his office like a trapped animal. "She's trying to destroy us," he muttered. But deep down, He knew the truth. Mary hadn't done anything to them. She had simply told the truth, and that, apparently, was enough to ruin him. His phone buzzed again. This time, it was a call from one of the board's senior members, the kind of call he couldn't ignore. As he answered, the voice on the other end was cold. "We're going to need you to prepare a formal statement. The press is starting to ask questions about the Trident fallout. We'll review it tomorrow morning. And Marcus, don't spin it." He was losing control, quickly, visibly. And Mary hadn't said a single word to the press, to the staff, to anyone. She didn't need to. Marcus Bell wasn't the kind of man who threw papers or shouted in meetings. His anger didn't explode. It curdled. And in the days following Trident Group's exit, his rage settled into something darker. Strategy. He didn't just want Mary gone. She was already gone. He wanted her erased. He wanted to make sure no one, not clients, not future employers, not even her own reflection, would forget what it cost to cross him. He began by calling in a favor from a man named Glenn Faulkner, a reputation management consultant who specialized in internal damage control. Glenn had worked with CEOs accused of embezzlement and politicians buried under ethics scandals. He was expensive, discreet, and well-connected. "I want everything on her," Marcus said during their first meeting. "Every post, every job, every contact. I want to know who's hiring her and what they're saying about her." Within 48 hours, Glenn delivered a file with Mary's personal information, resume history, and a list of companies she might work for, including Trident, based on the courier drop-off seen earlier in the week. Marcus skimmed the list. "Start whispering," he said. Glenn didn't ask what that meant. He knew. Within a day, subtle calls were placed to HR departments at 2 of Mary's past employers. Suggestions were made. Not outright lies, just questions. "Are you sure she's stable? We've heard some odd things." Strange she didn't list her formal credentials. She was involved in some kind of internal disruption. Nothing official, of course. He sent a red flag email to a hiring firm in Boston. Just a few lines, no signature. "You may want to reconsider your candidate. Internal security flagged irregular behavior. Unconfirmed, but risky." Marcus also pulled one more string. He had the company's legal team quietly send Mary a formal letter accusing her of breaching confidentiality. It didn't carry real legal weight, but it was enough to look official. He knew some companies backed off candidates the moment legal paperwork got involved. "She wants to move on?" Marcus muttered in his office. "Fine, but not without remembering what happens when you bite the hand that feeds you." He smiled bitterly as he deleted her profile from the internal system, marking her as blacklisted, do not rehire. Then he went further. He altered the HR records manually, changing her reason for departure from executive termination to violation of conduct standards. Subtle, quiet, buried in a system most people never checked. But if anyone did call, that tag would show up, and it would raise questions Mary couldn't anticipate. One afternoon, he even asked his assistant to reach out to a quiet press contact, someone who handled financial column blurbs. "Just background," Marcus said. "Just a note that we had to part ways with an employee due to internal disruption. Don't name her, but get it out there." The story appeared 2 days later in a small column under the heading Restructuring Realities. Sources at Grayson Manufacturing confirmed a recent staffing issue involving a longtime employee whose unorthodox behavior created confusion during client negotiations. No name, but enough to plant doubt. Enough to make Mary feel the shadow, even if no one said it aloud. He told himself it wasn't personal. It was about restoring order, about protecting the company, about making sure no one else followed her example. But every time he walked past the now empty conference room, every time he thought of her hands calmly signing behind his back, Marcus remembered what he really wanted: to crush the memory of the woman who exposed his ignorance with silence. The silence that followed Marcus's whisper campaign didn't last long. For a few days, he felt triumphant. News of Mary's name being quietly pulled from consideration at 2 firms trickled back to him. He grinned when one of Glenn Faulkner's contacts said, "She's being seen as a risk." It fed the cold satisfaction he craved, to rewrite Mary's legacy behind her back. But then, the silence broke, and not in the way he expected. On Monday morning, his assistant entered the office pale and stiff, holding a single envelope. "No return address," she said. "It was couriered, directly to you." Marcus took it, already annoyed. He opened the envelope and slid out the paper, a letter, short and typed in bold, clean font. It wasn't signed, but there was a single name in the header, Thomas Delacroix. "Mr. Bell, we are aware of your coordinated effort to harm Miss Mary Cooper's professional reputation. We consider this not only unethical, but indicative of deeper failings in your leadership character. Let me remind you that our decision to end our partnership with Grayson Manufacturing was not based on emotion, but on observation. What you are doing now only confirms the wisdom of that choice. Do not attempt to reach out to our affiliates, vendors, or mutual partners with further disinformation. We are documenting all communications related to this matter. Any continued interference in Miss Cooper's professional future will be handled through legal avenues. Govern yourself accordingly." Marcus stared at the page, expression hardening. For a long time he didn't move. Then he stood, slowly, and walked to the window. The city outside was gray and drizzling, smeared glass and blurred lights. His reflection looked paler than usual, smaller. He crushed the letter in one fist, but the message had already lodged itself in his spine. They knew, and they were watching. Across the city, Mary sat at a long, polished table in a quiet meeting room inside Trident Group's headquarters. Thomas Delacroix was there, seated at the head. To his right, Alice Freeman. To his left, a newly printed contract. Mary looked down at it with quiet disbelief. The title read, Director of Cross-Cultural Strategy and Inclusion. It wasn't just a job. It was a statement. They were giving her a title, a seat at the table, authority, not just as a translator of language, but of people. She wasn't there to repeat words. She was there to guide policy, to build bridges. Thomas signed to her with a soft, warm expression. "We don't erase those who stand for integrity. We build around them." Mary's throat tightened, but she smiled and nodded. She'd been quiet when they fired her. She'd been calm when Marcus tried to erase her. But now she felt the weight of something stronger. Recognition without noise. Power without shouting. Justice without spectacle. Marcus had tried to control the narrative, but Thomas had written the final chapter and sealed it with ink. Back at Grayson, Marcus was no longer storming hallways. He stayed behind closed doors, his voice reduced to murmurs behind frosted glass. Word had reached the board about Delacroix's letter. Quiet conversations began. One director asked the others, "If he's reckless enough to attack a former employee, what's he doing to the ones still here?" The question lingered. The same day, the HR director requested a private meeting with legal counsel, citing concern over altered employee records. The next day, Glenn Faulkner stopped returning Marcus's calls. By week's end, 2 more clients had asked for reassurance of leadership transparency. The echo of Mary's departure had become thunder. And still, she had not spoken to a single journalist. She didn't need to. Her name, now attached to Trident Group, carried more weight than any headline Marcus could ever buy. The email arrived on a Thursday afternoon. Subject: Special board session. Immediate attendance required. Marcus stared at it, unmoving. The meeting wasn't optional. It wasn't part of the regular calendar. It came from the board chair's office with no preamble, no context. Just the time, 9 a.m., and the location, the executive conference suite, a floor he no longer entered with ease. The next morning, he walked into the room with his usual posture, straight-backed, collected. But the faces around the table no longer looked at him the same. Politeness had been replaced by detachment. No greetings, no smiles. He sat. The chair spoke first. "Mr. Bell, the board has concluded its internal review." Marcus said nothing. "We've received formal statements from Trident Group, internal HR staff, and external contractors tied to recent events. These findings include confirmation of misconduct regarding former employee Mary Cooper." A document was slid across the table. Falsifying internal records, coordinated defamation, abuse of access to private systems, and reputational damage that has already resulted in 2 major client withdrawals and 3 pending lawsuits. Marcus opened his mouth, but the chair held up a hand. You will be offered the opportunity to resign, effective immediately, with no severance and a non-disclosure agreement that protects this company from further liability. If you choose not to resign, the board will vote on your termination and pursue litigation for breach of fiduciary duty. The room was silent. Marcus reached for a pen. His hand trembled, and with that single stroke of ink, the story he had tried to control ended, not with applause, but with paperwork. Later that month, the same conference room hosted a different meeting. A training seminar led by Trident's newest director of cross-cultural strategy and inclusion. Mary Cooper stood before a group of Grayson executives and department leads, not as an employee, but as a guest speaker. The irony wasn't lost on anyone. She began simply, "Let me tell you about the cost of not listening." She walked them through the partnership that once thrived, not because of spreadsheets, but because of trust. She spoke not with bitterness, but with clarity. No names, no accusations. Just the quiet truth of how easily people in power can forget the human thread that holds everything together. One of the senior managers asked her afterward, "How did you stay so calm?" Mary smiled. "I didn't stay calm. I stayed focused." Outside the corporate world, whispers spread. That Grayson had lost more than a contract, it had lost its compass. That Marcus Bell, once the rising star of corporate strategy, was now untouchable, his name quietly blacklisted by boards that valued reputation over results. That Mary Cooper had redefined what it meant to be qualified without ever raising her voice. And in homes and meeting rooms, the story made its way into conversations. About how one woman, dismissed for a lack of credentials, reminded an industry that dignity, respect, and presence often mattered more than degrees. In the end, it wasn't just Mary's story. It was a lesson written into every report, every hallway, every paused conversation between 2 people, unsure how to interpret the silence. A reminder that silence isn't weakness. It's language, and if you don't learn to listen to it, it will speak around you anyway.